You're just as bad as the people who wouldn't let Jay and others speak.
No. I'm just saying it matters what read of the data you have. And this leads to the last thing for young people in particular. So you were attacking Joe Rogan at the time, to circle back to how we started. And so that's how we had our exchange. And from what I remember, that exchange with Joe was saying at the time that for young, healthy people, they don't need the vaccine.
Right.
And you were attacking him.
Right,
You was talking about myocarditis.
Right. For the reasons I just said.
In retrospect, Joe was completely right about that. For young people, the infection fatality rate was 0.003%, and people who were dying and being hospitalized with COVID. But again, it was mostly young people with multiple comorbidities and obesity.
Yes.
For him to say that healthy young people don't need the vaccine, he was 100% right about that.
No, he's wrong.
And Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff, they endorsed his position on that.
No, because they could communicate the disease to other people. That's what matters. They could be with their grandparents. They could go to school. They could go to a Mavs game, right? And they could infect other people. We don't know what.
But vaccinated people were also spreading COVID.
Again, and the whole point, they might have been, but it was less than, fewer people. And we did our best. And we tested. Remember, you had to have a recent test to come into a Mavs game. We didn't just say you had to be vaccinated. You had to have a test. And so we accepted both once we were able to test quickly. And so
if you had just done the test, that would have been more sensible, because some vaccinated people were also spreading the virus. You should have just done the test.
Either
by the
way, the point is, it's not about just this is an infectious disease, right? It's infectious.
Yeah.
It's communicative.
And within a few months, the protection against infection wanes to zero.
Not the point. It's communicative. And so because it is an infectious disease, one person can communicate it to not just one other person, but lots of other people as well.
Regardless of vaccination.
Whatever it was, and vaccination reduced the probability of that happening. Now,
for a couple months.
For a couple months. And so we asked to see your vaccination status, knowing for that couple months that your ability to infect others is reduced. Would you agree with that?
For a couple months, yes.
Okay, so for a couple months, if kids were vaccinated, they could see grandma, and if every grandma 80 years old is going to have some level of comorbidity. Somebody working in their 60s at the grocery store, at the cafeteria, right, probably has comorbidities as well. And do you think
then they should get the vaccine? If it's so protective, then why do they have to rely on other people around them to get it?
They should get the vaccine, and they did get the vaccine, but still, like you said, it's not 100%. And the more comorbidities you have, the more risk you are. And so some of us decided that it is worth it to protect those people and to protect the unknown number of people, right? Because the vaccine helped. The vaccine was self-protective to keep you out of the hospital and keep you from dying, but you couldn't know exactly when its efficacy wore down. And so there was risk associated with that. If you were erring on the side of keeping as many people out of the hospital and alive as you could, then you're going to say, even though it doesn't have a big impact on you personally, it's still worth it to protect others around you. And that was the messaging.
Right. Except that when you instituted this policy to mandate it for your staff, that was October. By then, the vaccine was already radically waning, the efficacy against symptomatic infection.
No, because we knew that the disease was going to keep on mutating, and we didn't know what the efficacy of the next vaccine was going to be and the impact that it would have. And so I wasn't going to switch in and out. Okay, this vaccine's good enough. That vaccine is not good enough. And so it was a policy that worked for us. And from my perspective, I wanted to keep everybody out of the hospital and alive.
This episode is sponsored by Alchemy Elements. I've got to say, this stuff has become a staple in my mornings. I start every day with it in my smoothie or protein shake. It tastes amazing, but more importantly, it works. I feel sharper, more focused, more calm, have more energy throughout the day. Alchemy is packed with full spectrum mushrooms and adaptogenic extracts from plants like reishi mushrooms, cordyceps, lion's mane, shilajit, and more. Everything's third-party lab tested, which is really important to me because there are a lot of supplements and natural compounds and herbs available online, but they're not properly tested, and you can never be sure at times if it is safe and effective. In this case, everything's third-party lab tested, which is awesome, and the ingredients are all clean, powerful, and I'm sure you'll be able to feel the difference. Use code ILLUSION at checkout, and you'll save 10% on a one-time order or get 30% off your first subscription order, which comes with this beautiful ritual kit, a gold bottle, a gold spoon, and a gold handheld frother to mix it perfectly every time. Check it out. The link and the information is all in the description below. I highly recommend it. Right. But so again,
all you're saying is for the youngest population, their risk of dying and being hospitalized is far lower.
Well, I was going to get to that. But first of all, just again,
you're not saying that, there isn't as much or not greater risk to people with comorbidities and immunocompromised. You haven't said anything about protecting them at all.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, the vaccine, it's vaccine benefit versus vaccine risk. And we can circle back to risk because it's, in theory, it could be very beneficial, but for some people, they could get vaccine side effects. So you have to factor those two things in, as you know, right? But for older people, if the vaccine was as protective as the authority said it was, then they should have gotten it. Okay. But the problem is in October, when you mandated your staff to get the COVID vaccine, it was very clear at that point that the vaccine efficacy against symptomatic infection had waned down to 5-10%.
It was also very clear there were going to be more mutations and more boosters. Yeah. And it was also very clear that we couldn't, I couldn't know, nobody knew what the efficacy of those new vaccines were going to be. Agree?
Okay. Right, but the efficacy for symptomatic infection was almost zero when you mandated it. So I'm saying it didn't make sense.
It was never almost zero. It was never almost zero.
Vaccine was, most Americans, they got the vaccine during the summer months, I believe, June, July, August, and in October you mandated it. By that time already, the vaccine efficacy was waning significantly.
So we had at the MBA, they had epidemiologists left and right coming in and explaining all the data and everything. And so we did what every other MBA team did, and I was fully for it because that's what the data told us. Now, you might disagree with that.
Yeah, I do. And so does Jay and Martin and Tracy Beth Hogan, Marty Makary, who's the FDA commissioner.
Names, I know Jay's great. Some of those names I know, and I wouldn't trust them to.
You think Jay's great?
Yeah, I like Jay, right? But okay. I think some of the names on that list, I wouldn't trust them to make me an omelet, right? I don't think they're objective. But
I just name people that I fully. Jay, Marty Makary, who's the head of the FDA, Vinay Prasad. Yeah, Vinay Prasad's at FDA. Tracy Beth Hogan's at FDA. A lot of people.
Yeah, Tracy. I'm not going to go into names, but there's some of those people on the list. I don't think that they're objective, but that was based off of me reading multiple years ago.
Okay. We've been over the community benefit, but for people that you mandated to get the COVID vaccine, if any of them had a serious adverse event, would you be willing to compensate them for?
I didn't have any that had one, and I don't know if I'd be willing to compensate them for. We have insurance, and they could take it up with insurance, and we didn't have any of that at all.
Okay, all right. And as far as your criticism of Joe Rogan for saying that healthy vax,
I don't remember what I said, but yeah, I stand by in terms of I think kids should have got it as well, not because of their own protection, but for the protection of those around them. And I get your point that
that's not how medicine works. You have to prioritize your own health. And we knew there was a risk profile for kids with myocarditis, and later the FDA acknowledged there was a risk with post-vaccination and an elevated rate of stroke.
And would you agree that there was a greater risk of myocarditis for people who had COVID than those who only got the vaccine and didn't have COVID?
Okay, so this was the center of our debate. Okay, over email.
I don't.
So if you want to get it, okay, yeah. So we this was what we debated at length, and so if you want to get into it, we can get into it briefly. So the multiple cardiologists I've interviewed, including some that would be willing to talk to you, by the way, Dr. Anish Koka, he's a cardiologist in Philadelphia, who I interviewed a lot.
I remember you mentioning that guy. That was your go-to guy. Yeah.
He administered the COVID vaccine at his clinic, including to young people, and later regretted it because he realized that he did not properly account for the safety data, and that the FDA and the CDC, their recommendations and what they were doing was often very misleading and deceptive. And so he and I have gone back, and multiple other cardiologists, Dr. Asim Malhotra, world-renowned cardiologist, Dr. Venk Murthy, another great cardiologist. Okay.
Notice all the people that you agree with are world-renowned great cardiologists, and the people who don't agree with you don't get mentioned in the conversation.
The problem is when you say that, you're saying it backwards. It's my opinion is based on what the best scientists are saying.
And my opinion at the time was the same. Not just my opinion, but also from the MBA. We had every financial interest to not do any of that. to go into the bubble. And when was the January of 21 was the bubble? I forget. But we had every financial interest not to do any of this.
Yeah. Okay. So on the myocarditis point, I've talked about this on many podcasts years ago. This feels like we're going back into like ancient history. It feels like almost. But COVID myocarditis is very different from vaccine-induced myocarditis, because COVID myocarditis, that kind of myocarditis, and Anish Koka talked at length about, it was a very non-traditional form of myocarditis. That form of myocarditis is typically in older individuals with multiple comorbidities who are in the hospital, who then also have some level of inflammation in their heart. Their heart's beating really fast. They have multiple conditions going on.
And see what they say.
Okay.